Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. It is a pleasure to be back, as was mentioned, for the third time for this venue. Yeah, it's been a pretty crazy last 6 months in AI. It's been a pretty crazy in AI since November, I believe it was November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT dropped. I was in my postdoc at the time and I'd already spent the last 6 years at that point working at the cusp of AI research and development. So seeing a lot of what we've been building in-house suddenly hit the public has been transformative and remains transformative in many ways that are very exciting, in many ways that are very concerning. And it really is in that moment, following that deployment of ChatGPT and the kind of weekly or bi-weekly transformations in power that we've seen since then that I really was inspired to launch this company, Hortus AI. Hortus is the word for garden, and it was really inspired by my belief that what was missing in this moment, which is now I think properly thought of as a moment for agentic AI, is a more accountable and transparent ecosystem for how these tools are being deployed, what is being communicated about them from their builders and how, based off of that communication, a different way of relating to these tools can happen. Because what's really being developed is us, much more than the AI. We are the things that have changed in the last 2 or 3 years due to these tools. And there's a way to do that that's healthy and a way to do that that's unhealthy. And that's really a lot of the themes of what I want to talk about today. Who's afraid of agentic AI? I think the answer to that, I'll just go ahead and stake an answer to that. I think the answer is all of us to some degree or another. We're all feeling anxious about it. I think that's okay. There are a lot of good reasons to be anxious, but there's also a lot more that can be done if the right angle of attack is made on what is being built and if the right questions are asked of those who are building it. So, a little bit more about me. I just gave a little bit of an overview of, my world of AI. I've now been working at the cusp of AI for the last 10 years. The stakes for me were very personal. So, um, the kind of Sputnik moment for me when I joined the field was in 2016, which is when a lot of the algorithms, in particular the ones that power agents, agentic AI, were finally being deployed and scaled in a way that was very impressive. And when that happened, it was specifically when DeepMind deployed AlphaGo in, I believe it was March 2016, so exactly 10 years ago, almost to the day. Two thoughts occurred to me. One was like, okay, AI is really going to start happening now. This is not science fiction anymore. And the other was that it was likely to make everybody around the world become Appalachian. And what I mean by that is, I grew up in Appalachian, Ohio, Southeast Ohio, which is a part of the country that is very poor, very accustomed to being extracted from by systems that often purport to and are meant to be helping people, whether that's hospitals or schools or the job market, but in practice often misrepresent them and make them feel even more isolated than they were before they fit into them. That's been the culture of Appalachia for the last several centuries, not just years. And so I think what's really happened, especially since ChatGPT, is many of us have begun to feel, no matter where we live, whether that's, Arkansas or India or France or some other place, we feel increasingly vulnerable and isolated and insecure in the face of a technology that many of us really don't understand very well, and frankly, many of the developers also don't understand very well. And so, what was really interesting to me was, and motivating for me was, if we treat that problem, that social dynamic, not as inevitable, but as tractable, as something that can be worked on if we found new ways to relate to each other as we go about adopting these technologies, what would that look like? And so that's then led to all the work that my company has been doing, organizing these public-private partnerships, which I'm happy to share more about later in this presentation. And our goal and our mission really being to create a bottom-up approach to the way in which AI tools are understood and ultimately adopted, rather than the top-down approach, this technocratic approach that has largely governed the way this stuff has been built so far. So, as a preliminary for my remarks today, because we're really going to talk a lot about agents and what makes agents different and what doesn't make agents different. and what we should be thinking about as our jurisdictions or as our organizations are thinking about how to integrate or purchase or deploy them. I do want to touch base on some of the more recent developments. I'm sure many of this is not news to those folks, but I want us to be on the same page about this. I was living in DC for the last year and a half or so. And I was at the hearings where federal preemption of state laws and regulations surrounding AI were being debated. And it was interesting to see a lot of arguments were made then and have continued to be made that we have this kind of patchwork of regulations that different states have, and that impedes innovation or it slows down the way in which this technology can be deployed in the national interest. I see those same bullet points across many different thought pieces and out of many people's mouths, and I suspect that 2 years ago, some think tank in DC wrote the phrase patchwork of state regulations stops US innovation, need to get ahead of things. And that's just been parroted by like hundreds of different thought pieces since then. I thought this was, frankly, in many ways, a quite cynical gesture because I think even in the last couple days, we did see the administration put out AI guidances, some of which were kind of interesting and some of which I think we're not really touching the root of the problem. So what we've seen is this preemption, this kind of prevention, frankly, of many states trying to be proactive in the way this technology is being regulated or at least understood, but being stopped from doing that in the name of some hypothetical future laws or regulations with actual teeth that frankly we have yet to see. And I think we should be skeptical that we're likely to see that anytime soon. So we've kind of living now in this Wild West dynamic that's almost been enforced on us at the federal level. And that's been a very different context in which AI ethicists and responsible AI advocates have had to frame our work and continue to try to move the conversation forward. At the same time, this also, I think, just blew up a few days ago. I think it might have been on Friday or Saturday that this came out. I was actually training for a marathon. I just ran a marathon on Sunday, so I was a bit out of it, but have been following the news in the meantime. And basically, what we've seen is that this kind of cottage industry of companies that have tried to help many AI startups scale up and more rapidly achieve compliance with things like SOC 2, which, those guidances are often seen as table stakes in order to secure larger state or federal contracts, because it's an indication that you've been audited and that your technology really operates at the level that people should trust it at. What we've seen is this cottage industry of folks helping these companies has in many ways really just been faking it. They've been outsourcing the way they do their checks for SOC 2 to either other third parties or to, frankly, just random people around the world who just rubber stamp this stuff, or they automate it in ways that don't actually make sense. My understanding is that this story is still very much in process. It's not really clear what the full fallout will be for this company Delve or for other folks. But it's another example of this story that we're now living in, which, again, is one where not only are we kind of waiting for these guidances at the federal level to help us understand this moment, but don't have it yet. Even the guidances that we already have and that are rightly seen as table stakes are in question. And frankly, I think, although obviously Delve has looked very bad in this case because of the practices and the way that they've failed and shirked their responsibilities to conduct this auditing, I think the risk is this also makes SOC 2 itself look bad because suddenly a company that can claim this makes you wonder, like, well, what does that really mean? If I were to look under the hood, can I actually trust what this company is doing just because they've rubber stamped and have that SOC 2 indicator right there? So this is the context in which this presentation is happening, and it's the context in which I'll be speaking about agents and what it means if you're, in a Wild West and you're surrounded by these kind of agentic outlaws, and you want to know which, if any of them, should I do business with or should try and truck with, and what the risks are there. So it is important we get on the same page. I do want to also leave plenty of time for discussion. So there's really only a few key, very important points I'm going to be making in this talk, and then I'm going to give a quick demo of actually what my company is doing to try and actually address some of these challenges. And then I'd like to leave plenty of time for questions, and then that could be a more free-flowing and dynamic way for us to proceed. But as an overview, I'm going to cover basically what are the distinctive challenges agents pose, and getting us a little bit on the same page. even technically, about what that means, because I think having that baseline is really important so that you have somewhere else to start other than just what vendors are telling you. And then second, I'm going to talk about, okay, what it means once I understand what an agent is and what it's really about. What's really important when I'm comparing agents with each other? If I'm looking either at multiple ones the same vendor's offering me or ones from different vendors, what difference does that actually make beyond just the usual suspects of pricing and stuff like that? And then finally, when I'm actually going about, if I've committed to a purchase and I'm going about deploying this stuff, what should I keep in mind? And the way that I'll be talking about that is also in the context of giving this demo of what my company is building, which is already in use by over 100 jurisdictions across the country to basically help them source and vet the right kinds of AI solutions and agents for their needs. So, what are the challenges agents pose? Um, to get on the same page about this, it's worth reviewing, when we're talking about AI, what are the components that are typically at stake here? So it's not enough to just have a machine learning model and just have it classify things off of just whatever you put in front of it. There's a very involved pipeline that involves not just the technology, but also many service providers. Basically, when we're talking about AI, and the way we did talk about AI up until, I mean, really just in some cases a year, maybe 2 years ago, was a rather rich and somewhat, chaotic ecosystem of machine learning models, maybe a chatbot interface, many consultants or service providers who would assist with the implementation and integration of those technologies into often some legacy stack that your jurisdiction may have been maintaining for years, if not many decades. We'd be talking about many data sets that could be left over from that time or data sets that are going to be generated either synthetically or organically from that context of implementation. And then there's also usually some kind of platform through which this kind of coordination and integration is happening, in which the machine learning models sit, where the data is stored, and often with some kind of API access for the service providers to make sure that, through some kind of dashboard or some kind of visualization, they can make sure everything's on the level. They can work closely with your jurisdiction to make sure that your needs are being met, and there's a lot of communication that would need to happen there. So sometimes this proceeds smoothly. Sometimes it proceeds not so smoothly. Sometimes it takes a few months if you're incredibly lucky. Usually it takes years, especially if you're dealing with an enterprise level organization comprising hundreds or thousands of staff who might be exposed and expected to actually work with such a platform. What we've seen with agents and the whole promise of agents is very different than this pipeline that I just described. And that really rests on, and you may have heard some of these words before, but I really just want to take a minute, take a beat, and make sure we have this shared understanding together. Reinforcement learning is that key algorithm that's at the heart of what makes agents work. It's a different type of technology. It's a different type of AI than what we had seen, frankly, ever before interacting with people at scale. So that anecdote I gave of almost exactly 10 years ago, watching this new kind of algorithm being deployed, that was reinforcement learning. And what reinforcement learning does is it's basically a learning procedure that enables an agent operating in some arbitrary environment. Think of it like a sandbox. And the agent starts to kind of play around in that sandbox, take actions in that sandbox because it's looking for something. It's looking for some definition of reward, some kind of signal, some kind of goal it's trying to achieve. And what it's doing is not only trying to find, okay, where is that thing in the sandbox? But as I go about exploring, what behavior should I be learning of how to explore this reliably and efficiently and consistently achieve that goal and maximize reward? So this is a very different setup than we've seen with just garden variety machine learning, either supervised learning or unsupervised learning. The power of reinforcement learning, in a nutshell, is that it combines these different layers and types of AI implementation. It subsumes them. And the reason is that the way that the designer defines that environment and defines that reward for the agent is completely arbitrary. So what that means is the environment the agent is exploring is not necessarily just some data set that you might hand over to a company if it's going to supply you with some kind of machine learning model to analyze that data. The environment could be your own organization. The environment could be your city. It could be your residence. It could be the way in which people interact with your services. It could be the way in which staff talk to each other. It could be the bank records of those staff, even systems that are not directly relevant at first glance to whatever the specific tasks are that you might be interested in purchasing. If you want an agent, for example, to help manage 311 calls, for example, if you're managing some kind of municipality or some state level agency. Those agents might be learning from things and exploring things and probing things that at first glance may have nothing to do with emergency calls, but actually end up being relevant because it's learning a behavior that's helping it more efficiently achieve whatever goal the vendor has told it to achieve. If the goal is to maximize the number of calls that it can field, it might find ways to incentivize residents to call in more than they were before. And your phone lines might be going off the hook even more than they were because the agent's been told, okay, the more of these 311 calls you close, the better a job you're doing. So what this means is this kind of traditional waterfall of, well, what's the technology we need? What consultants can we outsource the work of implementing or overseeing this to? What data sets do we need to make sure they have access to make it work okay? And then what's the platform layer at which, we or other people are going to keep tabs on performance? That waterfall is disappearing. And it's being replaced by this kind of agentic whirlpool of swirling interactions and feedback loops and dynamics, almost all of which move faster than any single layer of procurement. Whether we're talking about sourcing or vetting or comparing or an RFP or an RFI or an actual solicitation or purchasing or implementation, all of those layers are being disrupted through what agents make possible. And startups know this. And that's the one reason many startups are embracing this Wild West dynamic because it enables them to just test and break things and see what these agents can do. And they face increasingly few repercussions because of this incredible opacity around what these regulations might actually mean, either from the federal or state level. So the risk here really is not just that agents are highly capable or highly powerful. If that's all the story was, we'd have every reason, I think, actually to be quite excited about it because they would just be a lot better at things we already know how to procure. That's not the risk. The risk really here is that these capabilities are eating up different parts of our own decision making in ways that are not immediately clear, and our ways of trying to understand them still tend to be slower than what the agents themselves can learn to do. And so that's why you see all these headlines and all these stories of agents finding new ways to achieve things or misbehaving. It's not because they're doing things that are wrong. It's because they're finding some unexpected way of achieving their goal that no organization or institution, including the vendor, yet had an eye on. So that's what I think is really new in this moment, is the speed with which these different layers are getting eaten up, the way they're being interwoven with each other and folded into the technology rather than kept at these different layers like we've been accustomed to for the last, several decades. So if we then look to say, okay, if that's this kind of chaos that we're dealing with here, what would it mean to actually compare these options with each other in any kind of responsible way? So on some level here, I don't have much original things to say because we all know, I think, at a very high level, what the structural risks are of this moment. The enormous energy impacts we've seen and shifts in energy impacts we've seen from data centers being deployed across the country, the change in energy prices that we've seen over the past 2 to 3 years in particular across the country, the pressure being put on energy grids, and the way in which jurisdictions are left in this kind of reactive and often passive state to these developments. This is one major story. As I mentioned, I was living in DC for the better part of the last year. And I remember week by week, 10,000 more federal workers losing their jobs, basically because of the initiatives that the new administration was putting through. And just in the last few weeks, or maybe it was now a month ago or so, we've now seen more recent established players like this anecdote of Jack Dorsey firing thousands of their own workers, even at private companies, as they begin to move even more energetically into the AI space. And we've also seen Meta make similar gestures to that end. And then I already brought up this story about compliance. Where does this leave compliance? We have regulations that are either not in the US, but are kind of taken seriously in a handshake way, like GDPR. We have frameworks like SOC 2, which remain widely trusted, but for that reason are getting gamed by this cottage industry of vendors who try to outsource the way that stuff gets rubber stamped. And then we have standards like HIPAA, which again remain widely trusted, right up until the possibility that even those could end up being something that may not map on well to what the next generation of agents will do. So I don't want us to be overwhelmed by this because I actually think the story remains quite simple. These risks are not really about agents. They're about the organizations that choose to build the infrastructure to either support agents or that choose to justify letting people go for the sake of agents, or they're about the organizations that are trying to hold this stuff accountable but don't necessarily know how to. So this is the kind of tension of agentic AI. On the one hand, the technology is moving very quickly and eating up a lot of the different layers that we used to kind of partition into these different stages of responsible procurement and implementation. On the other hand, those risks really remain in the hands of human decision makers, whether that's the vendor or different kinds of regulators. And so I think there's a kind of double speak here where we talk about AI eliminating jobs when really AI does not eliminate jobs. CEOs eliminate jobs. CEOs are the ones who actually decide who gets hired and who gets fired, and then they may justify that through some reference to an AI stack, but that's very different than the technology having this kind of inherent agency of its own. So it's the way in which those kinds of capabilities are allowed to be let loose or not by these different jurisdictions. That's the way I think we should understand these risks. So in brief, I want to give a few examples of what that looks like here. When it comes to safety, if you want to ask, okay, if an agent is safe, if it's safe for my workflow, what does that really mean? It's much more important to look to the behaviors of the agent than to just how well it performs on different tasks. So I already gave this example of 311. The most important thing there is not just how accurately or politely an agent may interact with folks who call in. It's really about what is the agent allowed to touch outside of 311 in pursuit of doing a task like that better and better. Because really what that's going to do is change your constituents' relationships with 311 much more than it is just improving the way 311 is set up right now. Another example, what range of actions can the agent take? It's not just about a single discrete task like classifying medical records or assigning somebody to some other stack, whatever task the agent has been set. How long is that horizon? How much autonomy has the agent been given? And are there hidden decisions in that process that should have been actually vetted or overseen by a human actor before that kind of delegation occurred? Another few examples here. How is information organized? You guys have probably heard the term RAG, retrieval augmented generation, is one way in which agents might retrieve information in pursuit of making a decision, but that's ultimately in terms of what the vendor has committed to, because they're the ones responsible for maintaining that. It's not just a story about the agent itself and what it can technically achieve when left to its own devices. And then, as I mentioned, what rules guide behavior? Are regulators actually in a position to determine something about what the agent is or is not allowed to decide or do? Or are rules more like a handshake, more like a gesture of appropriateness, and not really a hard constraint on the way an agent has been optimized to behave? A few other examples here, holding agents accountable. It's much more important, frankly, I think even in this moment, to look to orchestration as the key term here rather than compliance. The reason being that compliance, again, is basically in this rule-based regime that's much more committed to this waterfall mentality that even right now is not something we're getting a strong indication from the federal level that we can actually hold these new generations of capabilities compliant because it's not really clear if they know how to do that or not really clear if they're willing to do it to actually get ahead of what states are doing. So it's much more important to listen to your own staff, your own residents, the people who will be interacting with and subject to these technologies to see what they are telling you and what kinds of behavioral or explicit feedback from them will help you understand these impacts. So the technical term for that is orchestration. That's really where you see these different layers interact with each other. That's much more important than just
Yeah.
seeing what those rules amount to. I was hearing some volume in the background there. I'm going to keep proceeding though. So basically, we see a lot of examples where legacy compliance and regulation has focused on accuracy when really the issue is more behavioral. It's really more about what is changing about constituents' relationship, for example, with government services, and whether they remain satisfied with those services. And then if they're not, if you see dips or shifts, then digging deeper to say, okay, in what way is this agent responsible or not for such a shift? And then finally, and I'm just going to reference here briefly to the work the GovAI Coalition is doing, which is one of our partners, my company's partners. We work with the GovAI Coalition, which is a nationwide consortium of hundreds of jurisdictions across the country. They're trying to take a more responsible and transparent and accountable approach to the way AI technologies are being not just procured, but understood and integrated well. Is that this is really about you need to focus on educating and training your own staff and yourselves rather than just trusting in the performance of the tool, even if the performance is there. I mean, you should never just trust a vendor at face value, but even beyond that, you should really look to saying, like, how do we prepare our own organization in terms of how, and I'm just referencing what the coalition has described here as these phases of initiation, moving into delivery, moving into evaluation. How do you steward your own organization in advance of deploying these types of agents? So that when that whirlpool hits, you're at least in a position to understand what that disruption is and how it's impacting you, rather than just assuming that it's going to proceed in a linear fashion, because it's guaranteed to not proceed in a linear fashion. So I'm just referencing here, there's a lot of great resources that the coalition is making around these resources and toolkits for procurement that you can reference and read up on and that are open source. And if you go to their website, you can look in more detail to see how that works and that this is a stronger starting point than trusting these legacy compliance and rules-based approaches to a technology that remains in many ways a mystery box. So finally, then, if there's just a couple minutes left, I'd like to jump into basically more about what my company is working on to make these issues a little bit more tractable, specifically at the vetting and the sourcing stage. And so what that amounts to is this platform we've been building, which I've discussed before in the presentation, which is Trellis. So the trellis is the scaffold in a garden on which life can become healthy and grow. And basically, what this is it does basically what Consumer Reports does, but it does it for AI tools, specifically AI tools and agentic tools that are intended to serve the public interest. So basically, what it does is act as a marketplace where all these thousands of different AI applications are assessed by us and ranked for appropriateness on these hundreds of different use cases that different jurisdictions might put them to. And so we have a lot of third-party badges and forms of assessment that basically provide incentives for vendors to basically make better tools and document them more forthrightly in return for being made more prominent on the
Are you
marketplace.
setting up for this?
Am I setting up for
Sorry,
this?
sorry,
I would,
sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Go on.
I would be happy if there's a little bit, just a couple minutes here. I'd be happy to show a quick demo of how that works. So let me go ahead and pull up
Yeah.
another screen here. Can we all see this page? Hoping the answer is yes. This is the live platform. So you can see the iconography here. We just launched a new interface for this to make it even more usable based off a lot of feedback we've gotten. But yeah, it's a B2B, B2G marketplace for basically for responsible AI. So what you can do here is, as it says, find the right tool for your needs. And you can see here, if I click this, I can either filter by domain different applications, AI tools, agents intended either for healthcare or HR, administrative workflows, or criminal justice, transportation, education, as well as our most popular use cases here. For example, if I search 311, start to type that in, you can see that's one of our catalog use cases. And if I click that, what that will do is load a list of all the vendors we have. This actually says search over 2,000 AI tools and services. Actually, that number has more than doubled since we need to update that side of it here. So we have now over 4,000 different apps that we can also you can filter by these badges of assessment, basically that we've created. So rather than just waiting, for example, for GDPR or NIST to be applied to one of these tools, we actually have created our own interface that ourselves tests in real time every single one of these applications to see whether or not they do conform to these guidances, whether it's GDPR or NIST. I think we have a repository of like 10 different badges here. You can see a few more there. And these vendors are basically ranked in order of appropriateness on this use case. So you can click any of these listings. You can see how we determine them as either a model or a chatbot or a data set, what domain they're intended for. And if you click one of these listings, you'll see this documentation we've assembled basically to determine the quality of each of these tools. And if you were to click one of these listings, basically what that would show is the way we've scored them on these different criteria. So the goal here really is to help jurisdictions, no matter where they are, anywhere in the world, have a single source for impartial, systematic, transparent assessment of every agentic tool that has been or is being brought to market in a way that will enable them to either source capabilities that they've heard about from other jurisdictions, maybe, to see if it's a good use of their time or a potential purchase, or if they've heard of a tool, a specific vendor or a specific type of agent, but want to see what we say about them and what we can vouch for on their part. You can also search individual vendors. So this isn't just a way to search for use cases. You can also search for specific technologies that are in the market right now. And so our hope is that we can treat this kind of sourcing and vetting stage as a beachhead to eventually offer what I like to call AI procurement as a service or agent procurement as a service. Kind of think of it like an Upwork for agents in the public interest is how I like to phrase this. And there's plenty more I could show here in terms of the demo. I'll pause here and just return to the main topic here because I do want to leave plenty of time for questions. So let me see if I can wrap up here and just say, I think I had one more slide here that I will need to pull up. And basically just, to thank you guys for your time. And I do want to add that we are in open beta now. We will be leaving open beta soon. But if anyone on this call is interested, you should feel free to contact me or email me directly. And we have a way to provide complimentary access to early adopters and users so they can have full access to these Trellis features and see if that's of help. And we would love your help as well to try it out. So you could give us any feedback you have or any questions you have to help improve the platform at this stage because we are rapidly iterating and improving it in real time. So thanks very much. I'll see if I can pull up my slides here, but I'm happy to pause right now and hand it off and we can open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you so much for the presentation, which is really, really good. And I like very much the demo. So there are all kind of questions in the Q&A. I'm trying to organize a little bit. I will start with one, which is the last topic. It's about the platform. Okay. So there's two questions. The first one is how does the Hortus platform work to rank AI products and what factors contribute to its transparency in aligning products with public interest?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Happy to answer that. So I'll just say again, I spent a lot of this presentation, I think, being a little bit of a Debbie Downer. So I said a lot about what the limits of compliance is right now, the limits of the regulatory landscape, the limits of what we really can trust right now when it comes to these legacy forms of guidance. And that's really all meant to be a preliminary because I really do have a lot of hope. I really do have a lot of excitement and a sense of possibility because of the work that we're doing to basically say, well, look, if that's the landscape, if we're in the Wild West, the next question to ask is, well, what would a sheriff in town look like? Like, what would it mean if there was something that could act as an impartial assessor, not just of any individual tool or agent, but of this entire landscape of vendors, of use cases, of existing uses in different jurisdictions. And how can we make it so that those assessments can serve as a baseline for not just understanding the technology, but then actually choosing the right one that's most appropriate for your jurisdiction's needs. So the way we've set that up is we apply exactly the same assessments across every single tool. To reference what I said in the presentation, the fact that agents are eating up a lot of these legacy parts of the pipeline, whether that's the tool or the service provider or the data set or the platform, those are all getting kind of sucked up into this agentic funnel. It's actually an opportunity because we've designed our assessments to be applicable to that entire funnel. And we then apply that to every single listing we have in exactly the same way so that they can be ranked impartially and systematically on any use case that we have. Those assessments are basically, and if you go to the platform, you can check it out for yourself. But those scores are basically derived from criteria for security, privacy, and usability in the listing. So basically, we look to the commitments that the tool or the vendor has provided to how securely information is being shared, data is being stored, how it is that privacy is being protected, not just by not sharing information, but by delineating the specific types of stakeholders and roles uh, through which information or data can be shared by the agent or otherwise. And then finally, is it usable and intelligible and interpretable to the people that are actually going to be expected to use this thing? In other words, is it not just something that deploys well in the eyes of the vendor, but is it actually something that your constituents or residents or staff come away from using and having a good experience? These are the types of things that we look to. And so those are the three kind of buckets that we apply to every single listing. And frankly, many vendors find that we've seen some vendors when they join our platform, they're like, great, we want to be on this platform. We're like, sure, okay, we'll assess you. And then they come back and they say, hey, why is our assessment poor? Or why is it this? Or why is it that? And we're like, well, because you gave us access, so you gave us this documentation, and it didn't look good. And so if you want a different score, you'll have to change your behavior. And so we do work closely with, and we're happy to help vendors with that. Because our goal here is, again, not to pick winners, and this is in no way pay to play. It's really to incentivize vendors to be better. Because if vendors are better, they should be rewarded for that because then they can give us enough that then when comes time to having a conversation with a purchaser or a procurement team or a CIO, that conversation can happen. That's the most important thing right now. So we don't decide what a good or a bad AI is. What we've done is say, here is the baseline for what a productive conversation around procurement and purchasing could even look like and put you guys at that position right out of the gate rather than having you spend months or years, just kind of waiting for this dynamic to cool down enough that you can get a handle on things.
Great, thank you so much. There are some questions on the platform that have been already answered by you right now, Tom. But in any case, there are three. I'm just reading it. So in case there's something we're missing, there's one say, how can a supplier join? Another says, regarding Trellis, is there a way to filter by cost? And the other say, will you be continually auditing this platform? Can users also submit reviews?
Yeah. So I think the answer is yes, yes, and yes to all of those questions. Again, so the whole reason we approach this as a marketplace is, again, in the absence of static rules, in the absence of formal, static, unchanging guidelines for compliance, for regulation, for quality, for what's good, our vision was to say, if we can't trust that idea completely, but we also don't want to give up, how can we instead rethink guidance and behaviors and best practices dynamically? Okay, so not just as static, unchanging things, because agents themselves are not static, they're the opposite of that. How can we make our guidances and our best practices and our assessments as dynamic as the problem we're trying to solve? That was the whole vision. So what does that mean? We assess in real time. We regularly update all of our assessments. We encourage vendors to continuously update their listings. The more information vendors provide, including on pricing, the better they do on our assessments and the more badges they can be competitive on our in this ecosystem that we've created. We continuously allow reviews and comments not on those listings, either as questions, public questions for the vendors to address in their listing, or as reviews that these listings can support. And so, yeah, I showed the marketplace interface. If you were to click any of those listings, it would take you to the score that we've generated, as well as have a tab showing any of the reviews that have been assigned to that vendor based on past performance. And then if vendors want, they have the option actually to update and customize their listing to include existing or past clients so that folks can also see that as a baseline. In terms of how to sign up, like I said, I would encourage folks who are interested to reach out directly to me. I'd be happy to set them up. But what they can also do is, I'm happy to just also share a link to the platform in the chat right now, because then what folks can do is just visit it right now and try it out. The features, you don't even have to log in to basically try out the marketplace and search. And it would be great to just hear from folks, I mean, today or pretty soon, how that feels as we continue to iterate. So I just put a link to it in the chat, and that will give people the ability to just try out the search, look through what's there, and also let me know like if there are particular vendors or tools that you would like to see and don't. We're also very happy to add those at a moment's notice. We have a full pipeline ready in place for that. We also have a policy internally for folks to basically say, like, any feedback we get, if anybody says, hey, I can't log in, or this doesn't work, why is it this way? We actually have a policy as a company not just to respond to that feedback as soon as possible, but actually to push a fix within 24 hours. So any single concrete bit of feedback, constructive, that you can give to us, I can provide a guarantee that we will fix that within 24 hours, within one business day of it having been given to us. And it's very important for us to do that because that's how we bootstrap our own trust, in our stakeholders. And then we also have weekly newsletters that we send out to subscribers to give regular updates on all the new listings we've added, the new features. Just in the last week, we've added a feature that you can bookmark listings. And then if you're logged in from your dashboard, those listings, you can select specific ones, hit compare, and then based on your jurisdiction's needs, we'll generate a kind of custom consumer report comparing those listings against your needs and recommending which, if any of them, are the best fit for your needs or your stakeholders and why that is. With the goal being you could then export that as a PDF, hand it off to your CIO and say, this would have taken me 6 months on my own, but I just did it in 5 minutes using Trellis. And the more users we have, the more listings we support, the more documentation we have, the richer that all gets. And so, yeah, I need your guys' help to basically make this work well. We already are being used, as I said, by over 100 jurisdictions across the country, and we're looking for more users. Like we're ready to scale and grow now, and really ready to add that value wherever we can.
Hey, thank you so much. There are several questions about ethics and accountability. So I am trying to summarize those. And there's for example, this one that I think I summarize all others. You mentioned SOC 2. Ethics are so important in public organizations. What do you believe should be at the core of a public agency's digital responsibility plan?
Sorry, could you repeat that last part again? That was
it's what do you believe? Should be at the core of a public agency digital responsibility plan. Okay, which content should be there?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, I think a theme that ran through our presentation speaks to that, which is the next generation of AI tools are what I like to call feedback laden. And what that means is they generate more feedback often even than they know what to do with. You think of when I talk about feedback, think of has anybody been you've been like at a wedding and maybe the speech makers are a little bit tipsy, they've had a few too many drinks, and they have the mic and they're holding it too close to their mouth or they're holding it too close to an amplifier or something like that. and you get this, booming, higher pitch, and it's impossible to tell what's going on, hurts your ears. That's a feedback laden in the system. It's hearing itself, and then it's hearing itself hear itself, and then hearing itself hear itself, and it runs rampant very quickly. The danger is that's by default how all highly capable AI systems are built. They're all meant to invite so much feedback that they almost always short circuit something. And whether that's, the way you take in calls from constituents or the way your staff are accustomed to performing their work or something else, there's some other part of the workflow that's going to go out of whack. So the question was, what is the most important thing for these jurisdictions to be doing in this kind of moment? I think the most important thing they can be doing, and I referenced it through some of those coalition resources, is what it means to prepare your organization for deploying agents is to adopt a workflow where those feedback loops are something you have as much visibility on as possible. You cannot take them for granted. It's not enough to just assume that citizens will call in to your jurisdiction, to your agency, to your department when they need to. That's a reactive mindset because you're assuming that just whenever there is a problem, people will then reach out to you when there's a problem. You instead need to ask, how can we achieve a relationship with that system that is something where we can see how the feedback that governs it is going to like shift once we deploy, basically 10 times as many staff as we had before, because that's in many ways what an agent is. So often what that means is look for active feedback from your users, from your own staff. That could be surveys, it could be behavioral. It might be more important if you actually just see how long people are logged into certain systems at a time and learn from that and see what kinds of canaries in the coal mine there are for these shifts in the way that workflow used to work now that it's being disrupted by this technology. You can't assume you can automate parts of it and assume that the existing workflow will maintain the same level of performance. It will not be the same type of public service once an agent is in any way, shape, or form running it.
Thank you so much, Tom. Now, there are two questions about agents specifically. So this is I have a longer and a shorter. So the longer says, do you see the future of multi-agency service delivery being driven by a single orchestrating agent or a network of interoperable agents? And what standards or infrastructure are still missing to make that model viable at scale?
That's a great question. It's also a hard question. I think it depends on the use case. There are going to be some use cases where having, for lack of a better word, a single agent is maybe going to be the most appropriate thing to do. And the reason for that might be because that use case is either very well defined or something where the metrics for performance are understood well enough that a single agent could be responsible for managing parts of that workflow. There are other use cases. 311 actually might be an example where I don't think that's true. And the reason is either that different jurisdictions handle that use case so differently that it's actually appropriate for there to be more than one type of vendor and more than one type of agent managing it. Or it could be a situation where just to perform in a single jurisdiction well, you might need multiple agents. And the reason is, again, it's about those feedback loops. The question is, can a single agent manage that entire loop? Or is the loop itself better thought of kind of like an assembly line? We have multiple agents sitting at different parts of it, handing things off to each other in a way that's very modular, in a way that's very guaranteed, that's very smooth and efficient. So I think it depends. My philosophy and the philosophy of our company and specifically of the marketplace Trellis is in a vacuum. I'll just be blunt. I don't think any of the vendors out there right now should be trusted with having a one agent solution to every problem. Again, we're living in a Wild West moment. In the Wild West, you would not trust the very first person to take you across the Oregon Trail. Okay, you're going to want to play the field. You're going to want to see what's out there. You're going to want to see half a dozen or a dozen or a few dozen different options in terms of what this agent can be, how much it can touch, how expensive it is, what that really means, either in terms of money or data collection or what have you, or implementation costs, time costs. Because our belief is that the more reliable, trusted, impartial competition and comparison we can make possible, the better off we will be, both collectively and individually. We'll be able to see really where these things can be compared with each other richly and robustly, and where they can't be, that might be a reason to pause and not necessarily jump to adopting an agent. You shouldn't purchase and deploy something you don't have any confidence in or don't understand. Our job is to make you confident where you are. Until you're confident where you are, that's the first step in then deciding, are we confident in transforming ourselves by adopting something at this scale?
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. And now also on agents, there are a few questions that are asking if you could please repeat the definition of agents or what counts as an agent or some examples of their use.
Sure. Yeah. That's why it was so important for me to get us all on the same page about the technical definition of that, because it is important to have that baseline here. So this is just a very simple example, schematic of how this works. So to kind of compare this, an agent is something that you are allowing to teach itself how to do something. Another example that's often given, I think, is kind of useful. The famous Sorcerer's Apprentice cartoon, Mickey Mouse tells the brooms, or tells the one broom to fill the well with water, and it's doing it, and then it does it too much, and he tries to stop it, or it doesn't do it right, and then it explodes, right? So why is that an agent? It's an agent because it has been given permission to learn for itself, but also cannot decide itself what is worth doing. Okay. So if you look at this diagram here, everything in this diagram is defined by the designer, the human designer. The designer has decided how big is the environment. They've decided what is the reward. Okay, what is the goal? What is the thing that the agent is trying to achieve? And that's it. Then they step back and they're like, okay, agent, now teach yourself how to do that. So that's very different than just an AI tool, a classifier that is trying to, a self-driving car, for example, is just like predicting where if it's a stop sign or not, or is that a dog, or is that a pedestrian? That's just like it either is or it isn't. That's all it's doing. It's typically not teaching itself in real time how to drive, if that distinction makes sense, okay? But the whole power of agents is that that's what they do. And so to analogize that to the automated vehicle case, self-driving cars, um, we often talk about them like automated vehicles, which is a misnomer. Okay. They're not self-driving cars for the same reason that a car is not a horseless carriage. So that's another example where our language has not yet caught up with the technology. We now call them automobiles, and we don't yet have the right term to describe what self-driving cars really are. A self-driving car is not an agent. A self-driving fleet of cars, in some ways, is an agent. So Waymo, for example, is the agent. The individual Waymo car, that's just a little instrument tool thing. But that company and its thousands of cars, that fleet, in some cases is better thought of as an agent. And what it's doing slowly is transforming roads in the Bay Area where I live. Roads don't feel the same way in San Francisco now. I don't know if anybody's visited there. It feels like every other car is a Waymo car. When that happens, it changes what a pedestrian is. It changes what another human driver is. It changes what metro cars are doing, trolleys are doing. All those things change because that feedback loop is changing. So it's a different layer of abstraction, what agents do, than just what a garden variety machine learning tool does. There's lots of other examples I could give, but I'll probably pause there and see if there's any other questions.
Thank you so much. That was really, really clear answer. I think we have time for just one final question. And it says, how are you incentivizing yourself to stay true to the platform users and not to the vendors? I think they're asking your internal guardrails.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is absolutely key and pivotal to what we do. And the answer to that is basically, I think of what we do as we always ask ourselves, not how do we please a vendor or how do we make procurement faster or how do we, just arbitrarily find some new lever to push or button to push or lever to pull to make it so we can we can make this marketplace feel different. The question is always in our minds, how do we make the marketplace we're building more trusted? How can we make the marketplace itself a place that when you go to it, you feel good and you feel better when you leave it than you did when you went? Because we're all anxious. We're all fearful and scared of this moment. And we have right to be in a lot of ways. Okay, I feel that way. And I've been studying this stuff for 10 years. So don't beat up on yourself for feeling like you don't understand what's going on here. I don't understand what's going on here in all the ways that I can. But what we're doing is saying, when you come in with those feelings, you come to our site. If you're a vendor, can you feel like there are lever that you can edit your listing, improve it, change your documentation, or change something about the way you built your tool in a way that you see the differences manifest in how you're presented? If you're a user, can you come and say, hey, I found a new use case I didn't know about? I learned something about a vendor that they never would have told me on their own. Not because they're lying, but just because they wouldn't have understood how to. I found a new way to compare these vendors I've heard about that I might not have even ever thought of. And I can now take that with me and I can carry those questions over and I can ask that, not just of those vendors, but of any vendor I run into the future. Can we give people the tools to feel more secure in this ecosystem? That's how we keep ourselves accountable. So the forms we're doing that are through the weekly newsletter that we send out to both users and vendors. Presentations like this, where I am radically open to any feedback and questions I can get. We do it by continuously updating the number of badges that we can support. Again, we're not picking winners. We're actually implementing some environmental energy badges on top of the ones I just showed, so you can see not just how well the agent performs, but how environmentally or energy conscious the vendor is behind it, because that's a really important dimension. So what we're always doing is saying, how can we just create experiences in this moment that you otherwise can't get anywhere else? Because the Wild West keeps you in this kind of locked position of just hugging yourself. How can we create a place where you feel open to learning and finding new questions that you can then carry with you in the conversations that you want to have with vendors or regulators or your own constituents or stakeholders who are looking to you for experts answers that you otherwise just might not be in a position to do. So I hope that addresses the question. There's obviously a lot more that can be said there, but that's very key to our mission, and so I do really appreciate the question.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the answers, the presentation, and everything here today, which I think really, really great. And thank you so much to our participants for the questions and the interaction and the conversation. So we hope to see you soon in our next workshop session. And thank you so much again. And I am going to close the session now. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.